Inequality. Oh my God, I could go on and on and on about this one big gripe of mine. I mean, if you were to think about it properly, inequality is one of the greatest evils that we face in the world today. The idea that one individual in the world could own as much wealth as a full nation is ludicrous, to say the least. Some individuals in the world own enough wealth to cover 1, 2, 3 nations at a time. In fact, I think the global figures at the moment stand at 24 individuals. 24 individuals in the world own as much wealth as the bottom 50% of the world. So about just over 3.5 billion people, as it were. In South Africa, the figures I think the World Bank released say that the top wealthiest 10% of the population owns as much as about 71% of the wealth in South Africa at the moment. So top 10% has as much wealth as the bottom 71% of individuals. And I think for me the evil around it is the idea that it is okay for that kind of wealth accumulation to happen, but only for a few individuals, because the rest of the individuals must squalor and must figure it out, as it were. Now, here's the distortion in the issue that I wanted to talk about today. The distortion is the idea that inequality is a poverty problem. And because nations understand inequality to be a poverty problem, they tend to put in place solutions that try to address poverty, as it were. So a lot of countries, when they are talking about how they are addressing the question of inequality, they will make examples about the fact that they are trying to create employment opportunities for the poor. They are trying to deliver social services. They're trying to put in place social safety nets in order to actually help the poor. But inequality is not a poverty problem. Inequality is a wealth accumulation problem. More specifically, inequality is a problem of how wealth is accumulated in a way that is exclusive only to a small, minute group of people, as opposed to wealth accumulation being accessible to the broader populace, as it were. And so track with me for a minute and think about this, because it is quite a mental shift to think about it in this way. If you were to start seeing the inequality as a wealth accumulation problem, one of the things you would start doing, or one of the questions you would start asking, would be, what is it in our system that enables these few individuals to expropriate and accumulate wealth in such a gluttonous manner and in such an exclusive manner? And if you were asking that question, you would have to start thinking about, do we need to have things like measures like wealth caps, for an example? Do we need to start thinking about measures of how people accumulate resources, how they accumulate assets, and the limits that we want to put into the accumulation of those assets? Do we want to start putting measures in place to say, should you accumulate this much, your responsibility is to give back this much, as it were? One of the things that is said over and over again is how smart rich people are in evading taxes, okay? So that in some countries, you might find that the proportion of taxes that you are paying as a poor person is actually greater than the proportion of taxes that a wealthy person is paying, because they can stifle off resources through illicit financial flows. They can do it through establishing corporations that allow them to actually release the burden of paying personal tax, because now it becomes a business tax, and they actually benefit from incentives that are given to corporations and businesses. They can establish trusts and foundations that make sure that they don't have to pay taxes, because they are seen as being engaged in charitable work as opposed to income generating work. There are all sorts of mechanisms that are legal and that are smart, that wealthy individuals engage in order to avoid just the tax burden, as it were. And so if you look really into the system, one of the things that you can start fixing is to say we need to focus less on dealing with the poverty issue, or while we deal with the poverty issue, let's also deal with our systems for wealth accumulation. Let's start putting controls in place. Let's start putting responsibility in the shoulders of those who in fact accumulate wealth in these ways. And I am convinced that if we were to start making that shift, we would get much more creative around how we reinvest these resources that have been accumulated through gluttonous means by the uber wealthy or uber wealthy of the world, as it were. And I'm pretty sure that the discourse would start changing about what inequality is and how we begin to fix it. Let me know what you think about this. This is Namhla Mniki from African Monitor, as usual, your resident provocateur. Blessings.